Is Iran really prevented from getting a nuclear weapon? Maybe we sent it back 2 years, but we also ushered in a much more dangerous era.
What happens next largely depends on Iran. They get the next move.
This is all a gamble.
I'm thrilled to be joined today by Jeremy Bash. Jeremy was chief of staff at the Department of Defense and at the CIA in the Obama administration. He is a trained lawyer who has worked on some of the nation's most critical national security matters. And he is also a person who is deeply well versed in this region and this conflict. Jeremy, it's so nice to see you today and not in a suit and tie.
Great to be with you, Jessica.
I really appreciate your time on a Sunday. There's plenty of news to get into, but I first want to take a step back. For folks who aren't deeply well versed in this conflict, can you help us with this? What is the best argument in favor of the U.S. taking the action it took yesterday in striking Iran's nuclear sites? And what is the strongest argument against that action?
Well, Jessica, I would say here's the logic that you have to kind of accept if you want to endorse a military strike against Iran at this moment. And I'll kind of lay it out. And it really begins with the Iranian Revolution in 1979, with the Shia state of Iran taking over and then becoming an adversary of the United States and obviously a key sponsor of terrorism. The Marine barracks attacks against our own service members in Beirut, in which more than 200 service members were killed. That was sponsored, paid for by Iran. Many other terrorist attacks over the last several decades. Obviously, they have been the key sponsor of Hezbollah, which has been a terrorist military in Lebanon that has been going after and trying to attack our ally Israel. And Iran has also attacked our own forces many times. They've shot down our aircraft over the Arabian Gulf. They've fired rocket, artillery, and mortars at our service members in the region. And they have been the world's greatest state sponsor of terrorism. In 2008, after Obama was elected, I was serving as the intelligence staffer on the transition team for the Obama-Biden transition. So George W. Bush, Dick Cheney are leaving office, Obama, Biden are coming into office. And I was staffing the transition. And so part of my job was to look at the intelligence that the CIA had and to advise some of the senior people taking the major roles in the Obama administration. And sure enough, right at that time, we received intelligence that Iran was building a underground facility deep inside a mountain to spin centrifuges, which is the way you have to enrich uranium. Now, uranium is, of course, fuel for nuclear energy. It can be used for civilian purposes. But the way Iran built it, it was clear and tailor-made from this intelligence that it was tailor-made for military purposes. By the way, the intelligence was Israel had gotten a source inside this facility at Fordo, and they took pictures of it. And they took those pictures and the photography and other information, and they showed it to the United States. Ultimately, President Obama declassified that information. But when I was the intelligence staffer on the transition, this was like the biggest secret. Like, oh my God, we're coming into office and Iran has this secret military facility. Now, two reasons why it looked like a military facility. One was it was in a mountain. Why would you put a civilian nuclear power plant deep inside a mountain? Second is it was too small for a civilian nuclear program to power the country. It was like, in order to have a civilian program, you'd have to have something, several times larger than what they built at Fordo, because you really only need a very small amount of enriched uranium for bomb fuel. And by the way, just to kind of like flesh this out, so the U.S. intelligence community had long assessed that Iran in the 2000s kind of wanted to have a nuclear weapon, but they, in 2003, decided to suspend their work on weaponization. So to get a nuclear weapon, you have to have three components. You have to have the bomb fuel, the enriched uranium. Second is weaponization, like the implosion device. And the third is mating that implosion device onto a ballistic missile. So the U.S. intelligence community assessed that they were enriching uranium, claiming that they were doing it for civilian purposes. But, all it takes is to kind of like fast forward that centrifuge, make it spin a little faster, and then you get bomb fuel. The second part, the weaponization part, the U.S. intelligence community assessed that Iran had suspended that effort. Why did they suspend it, by the way, in 2003? Well, in 2003, the US had invaded the country to Iran's right, Afghanistan, and the country to Iran's left, Iraq. And I think Iran probably thought, we're next. This is in the post 9/11 era. We're next. We got US forces on our right flank and our left flank. If they find out that we've got a weaponization program, they're coming right for us. And so they hit pause on their weaponization program. But they kept all the scientists and they kept all the know-how and they kept kind of doing a little bit of research here and there. And then on the ballistic missile program, as we now know, we've seen the evidence of these ballistic missiles. They've really advanced their ballistic missile fleet, their program, their range, the capability, the payload, their targeting, their ability to really hold at risk places like Tel Aviv and Haifa. But it could be any city. It could be Saudi Arabia, it could be UAE, it could even ultimately be cities in Europe. And an ICBM, I should say, if they were to get access to that, as North Korea has, and as obviously Russia and China and other adversaries of the United States have, these could actually range and hit the United States. So,
But let me just say, they don't
yeah,
have that right now. An
they do not.
intercontinental ballistic missile that reaches the US. They don't currently have that.
They currently do not have that, but they do have missiles that could hit U.S. forces, U.S. military bases. So we've got an enormous military base in Qatar called Al Udeid. We've got a very large military presence in Kuwait. We've got a very large military presence in the United Arab Emirates at Al Dhafra. We've got military forces in Saudi Arabia. We've got the Fifth Fleet of the U.S. Navy headquartered in Bahrain. We've got aircraft carriers and destroyers and air wings all over the region. And so there's a lot, and we also have embassies in every country, and these embassies are huge compounds, sort of like mini cities unto themselves. So we've got a lot of sitting ducks in the Middle East, and Iran has shown through its surrogates and proxies that it's kind of willing to attack those, and they have done that. And they've shot down our aircraft flying in international airspace. They shot down an American flagged unmanned system, a drone, in 2019, flying in international airspace, conducting routine intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So Iran has the ability to hit, if it wants, a lot of U.S. forces. So back to the weaponization issue. So the Trump administration comes in and they're looking at this site picture and they're looking at, okay, this is kind of the state of play. In fact, the intelligence picture really hasn't changed a lot, meaning they have been enriching uranium. They have a suspended weaponization program, but all it would take would be a decision to restart that. And then they've really got an advanced ballistic missile program. So how long would it take for them if they decided tonight, on Sunday night, we're going to create a nuclear weapon? How long would it take for them to do it? And there are various estimates, but I think, the U.S. intelligence community more or less believes that it would take them a few months. It would take them probably a very short amount of time to spin that uranium to higher levels of purity and get enough for a few bombs worth. And then it would take them several months, maybe a year, maybe 6 months, who knows, to actually get an implosion device. By the way, that's a pretty sophisticated nuclear weapon. They could also go for a much cruder weapon called a gun type device. A gun type device is what the U.S. used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the first generation 1940s vintage, projectile hits a projectile inside the nuclear weapon, causes a nuclear reaction. Those, considered atomic weapons. Now we're talking about obviously the era of thermonuclear weapons. But a rudimentary gun type device would be in the hands of Iran a very dangerous proposition. So we're sitting here with a situation in which we believe Iran is a few months away, should it make the decision, from having a nuclear weapon. And once you get a nuclear weapon, basically you can blackmail anybody, and you can blackmail the entire world, and you can hold at risk anybody. And it would be an intolerable situation, which is why Democrats, Republicans, literally everybody across the political spectrum, from Obama to Biden to Trump and everybody in between, have always said, no matter what, at the end of the day, we have to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. The only question is sort of how. Negotiations, coercive diplomacy, negotiations backed up by military force. Okay, that's kind of the overall situation. But Jessica, I want to kind of lay out just two other bits of context. One bit of context is that in 1981, Israel bombed a nuclear reactor that Iraq was building at Osirak. And at the time, Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister of Israel, did this, and people said, "Oh, it's so aggressive by Israel, and why would they do this? They don't have a weapon; they just have a nuclear reactor. What's going on?" And then later, of course, the world said, thank you, Israel. We appreciate you doing our dirty work because, of course, Saddam Hussein having a nuclear weapon, an actual nuclear weapon, would have been a terrible outcome. And then in 2007, Israel developed information that Syria was building a nuclear reactor at a place called Al-Kabar. They actually bought the designs from North Korea, which has a plutonium enrichment facility, plutonium enrichment program, actually. And Syria starts building this nuclear reactor at Al-Kabar. Israel develops the information. They go to President Bush and they say, we're going to take this thing out. And he says, go for it. And they run an operation and they hit with airstrikes Al-Kabar reactor in Syria. And again, everyone's saying, well, this thing was under construction. They didn't have a reactor. They didn't have a weapon. They didn't have fuel. They were like years away. And then once Assad started using chemical weapons on his own people, and obviously he became a major ally of Iran, hosting Hezbollah, hosting the IRGC, and kind of becoming a total, anathema to international security. People say, thank you, Israel. Glad you did that. Because again, Syria having a nuclear weapon would be an intolerable situation. Because again, Jessica, the whole kind of nuclear paradigm is that we've got 5 declared nuclear weapons states. They're the 5 members of the Security Council. The Security Council of the UN isn't a club of like-minded nations. It is people with nuclear weapons. It's Russia, China, the United States, Great Britain, and France. We are the 5 declared nuclear powers. And because we've got nuclear weapons, we've gotten together and said, we're going to write the rules of the international security order. We don't all agree with each other, but we're going to make the rules. Okay? There are 3 undeclared nuclear states, India, Pakistan, and Israel. And I think, in general, the world has kind of said, all right, more or less, we may not like what Pakistan is doing, we may not like what India or Israel is doing at any given moment, but these are generally governments that we sort of think of as led more or less by reasonable people. So we're not going to rally the world to undo India, Pakistan, or Israel's nuclear weapons programs. Okay, so we got 5 declared states and 3 undeclared states. The idea of a nuclear weapon in the hands of a rogue nation is an international security nightmare. CEG North Korea. Look at what North Korea has been able to do. And North Korea now has a ballistic missile program. They could, if they wanted to tonight, Jessica, fire a nuclear weapon at Seattle, at San Diego, at Hawaii. Now, we think we've got them deterred. We think they know that their regime would end if they tried to do it. Plus, we could intercept those. And so maybe it wouldn't do harm. But the idea that Iran, like North Korea, would have a nuclear weapon would just be an absolutely intolerable situation. So why now? I mean, because the state of play hasn't changed, but the context has changed. And this is really why I think Israel conducted their operation starting last Thursday and why the Trump administration decided to conduct their operation now. And this is the logic of it. I'm just kind of explaining the logic. I'm not endorsing it. I'm just saying this is the logic of it, which is Iran has no air defenses. So whereas before, if you were in the Obama situation room, or even in the Trump one or the Biden situation room, you're saying, should we send B-2s over to hit Iran's nuclear program? That would be the easiest thing to do. Just finish it in one night, or at least set it back in one night. We're going to debate whether or not it finishes it, but set it back in one night. You get laughed out of the room. You say, are you kidding me? We're not putting our troops into harm's way. Iran has very sophisticated air defenses. But what happened was in October of 2023, on October 8th, 2023, not October 7th, 2023, Iran joined Hamas's war against Israel. They unleashed Hezbollah to fire on Israel's north, whereas Hamas had invaded in the south. And so Iran said, we're all in. This is such a great success by Hamas. We're going to kind of destroy Israel as a polity, as an actual thing. So Iran joined the war. Then there was a back and forth between Israel and Iran, contained mostly to Hezbollah and Syria. Israel killed a bunch of Syrian generals who were at the embassy of Iran in Syria. And at that moment, in April 2024, so a little more than a year ago, I think Iran engaged in a huge miscalculation. They fired hundreds of ballistic missiles at the United States. They did so pretty sloppily. We had massive warning. The US, the Biden administration, organized an amazing international coalitions, Arab countries, Israel, the US operating together. We used Aegis, we used F-16s, F-15s, Patriots, Arrows. We knocked the out of Iran's ballistic missile program. And basically none of them did any damage. And so everyone's thinking, well, they're not as kind of strong as we thought they were.
Meaning
And
Iran didn't strike back after
then,
that.
so Iran sent ballistic missiles. We and Israel intercepted them.
And
Then
we suffered no damage, right?
we suffered. Then Israel had decided, like, is it going to respond? And actually made a decision to like kind of respond kind of quietly because it had sort of the casus belli. It had the justification, the
Yeah.
rationale to unleash a massive counterattack against Iran. You just attacked our country. Heretofore, all of our skirmishes have been in third countries through proxies. This is state on state violence.
Right.
Israel said, no, no, let's not do that. Let's just do a couple of pin prick strikes in some key areas, take out some of their air defenses, basically just to show them that we can do more. And that's what Israel did. It was a very small operation in April of 2024. Then again, back and forth with some of the surrogates. Israel took out the Hamas leader who was in Tehran. And again, I think October 1st, 2024, Iran miscalculated. They said, we can't take these counterattacks. And they launched another barrage at Israel. By the way, at that time, on the October 1st, 2024 barrage, we didn't have a lot of warning. It was actually Israeli intelligence that picked it up and tipped off U.S. Central Command, tipped off the Biden administration, and said, hey, this thing is happening today. And here's the precise information about where it's happening. Thank God for that because we were able to posture quickly and again repel Iran's attack. But after that second attack, Israel said, now we've got justification, we've got a motivation. And at the end of the Biden administration, October 24th, 2024, just before the election, the Israeli government, telling the U.S. what its plans were, undertook a massive operation inside Iran to take out its ballistic missiles, its ballistic missile productions, and its air defenses, basically leaving Iran completely defenseless. So 2024 ends, Jessica, you know, out with the Biden-Harris administration, in with the Trump administration, and you've got the same kind of intelligence picture that I described has been in existence. Iran enriching uranium to levels that are concerning, 60% higher than needed for civilian uses, but not yet bomb level. They've got a weaponization program, which maybe they started, maybe they didn't start. We don't have perfect insight. We sort of think that they haven't made the decision yet, but they could. Their ballistic missile program is increasing, and yet they're defenseless. We've got, oh, by the way, Hezbollah's been destroyed. Oh, by the way, Syria, the government's fallen. We have a perfect air corridor. And in fact, if you looked at the map that the Pentagon released when they described Operation Midnight Hammer, they showed that our planes flew right over Syria. Syria has no air defenses. There's no government there. So there's no Hezbollah, no Syria, and no air defenses. Iran is sitting there naked and afraid. Now, again, some viewers, listeners might think, well, that's not a reason you attack someone just because they're weak. Actually, it kind of is. And let me explain that. When you're in the Pentagon, I started in the Pentagon, when they brief a military operation to you, the first thing on the first slide is, the mission. What are we trying to do? The second thing they brief is risk to the force. How dangerous is this mission? I mean, if it were a cakewalk, we might do it. But if our people are getting shot up, we're going to lose, people. We're not going to do it. It's the reason why everyone says, don't put boots on the ground. Don't put boots on the ground. Because obviously, boots on the ground is a huge commitment and it puts people in harm's way. It's what we experienced ourselves in Iraq, Afghanistan, and so forth. But if we can undertake a military operation with strategic effects, with standoff weapons, with weapons that don't put people in harm's way for the most part, every mission is dangerous, but if it's much less dangerous, the risk reward calculus changes. And so you're asking me for the argument for. The argument for, the logic is the risk reward calculus has changed. We have Iran without defenses. We have an Iran that joined the war against Israel. We have an Iran who we don't trust. We've offered them negotiations. We basically said you've got 60 days to come to the table and cut a deal with us, whereby you're going to essentially give up your ability to have a domestic enrichment program. Why do you need one? We'll sell you nuclear energy. If you want nuclear energy, that's what you want, we'll sell it to you. Everyone has said that for 20 years. Why do you need to enrich uranium? I mean, it's kind of like saying to a mass murderer, why do you need to have ammo?
Right.
Why do you need to have a model gun? Well, it's just for show. I like to have one on my wall. Really? I mean, but if that mass murderer is well armed, you're not going to go in there and storm his house. But if he's totally defenseless, you might just go in. You might just knock and say, "Hi, we're here. We're here to take your stuff." And that's kind of what the U.S. did.
So the playing field really had changed. I hadn't thought about the fact that they could fly over Syria and have that easy access. I learned so much from you every time we have a conversation, Jeremy. Can we do the inverse?
Sure.
What was the case against? And I know a lot of people will point out there was a nuclear deal that Trump tore up in his first administration. If he had kept that in place, maybe we wouldn't be here today. These are the arguments one hears.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the main argument is Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapon. Somehow, over 20 years, a combination of sanctions, diplomacy, and military deterrence have kind of kept them short of a nuclear weapons threshold. And while it's an uncomfortable situation, it is one in which they have not been able to use nuclear blackmail or use a nuclear weapon against anybody, who kind of we hold dear. And and Iran, Iran felt deterred in part because we always said military options were on the table. And at the end of the day, what is a nuclear weapons program? It's know-how by scientists. Because of course, if I hit your centrifuge, you can build another one if you have the know-how. So the question kind of a strategist would think about is, can I bomb away know-how? Like, can I actually use military force to take out knowledge? You really can't. So we could destroy cascade halls. We could destroy centrifuges. We could sabotage them. We could bomb them. We could cyber attack them. And by the way, we've tried all of that. And we could also convince them to give them up. And we could put inspectors in. But at the end of the day, the only thing that is going to prevent Iran from having a nuclear weapons program is some sort of agreement that we can verify with inspectors on the ground who can have no notice inspections to look at every site they want. And Iran would have to agree to this. I mean, Iran would have to agree that they could have a kind of inspections, inspection regime, and we would try to enforce it that way. And that's kind of what diplomacy offers. It offers an agreement with Iran. And then obviously no shots are fired, and hopefully you avoid the loss of life. And you don't have to use military force to achieve something. The other argument against is that, you know, think about the countries in the region that got toppled. Saddam Hussein, did he have nuclear weapons? Mm-mm. Gaddafi in Libya, did he have nuclear weapons? Mm-mm. But Bashar Assad in Syria, did he have nuclear weapons? No. Kim Jong-un in North Korea, did he get toppled? No, he didn't. Why? Because he has nuclear weapons. And Iran might just conclude, we kind of didn't want to have nuclear weapons because we didn't want to trigger military responses. That was the wrong call, guys. Ayatollahs, that was the wrong call. We should have actually had a nuclear weapon because look at Kim Jong-un. By the way, look at Vladimir Putin. Look at the 5 members of the Security Council. No one with them. They write the rules of the international security order. The way you have power and strength in this world is by having nuclear weapons. Look at Israel. So we made a mistake by trying to kind of like go to the 2 yard line, but never cross, never trigger, never kind of like trigger that military response. We should have actually built the damn thing, and then no one would with us. And that's basically what Iran might do. And I think the strongest argument against military action is there's nothing to stop them from saying, all right, we're going to go quiet for 6 months, a year. We're just going to like lick our wounds, and we're going to figure out not just one bunker in Fordo, we're going to figure out 40 bunkers because they don't have, we dropped what, 7 massive ordnance penetrators on Fordo. That we don't have 7 times 40. We don't have that many B2s and to carry them. And so they might pick 40 mountains and bury and disperse and reconstitute a nuclear weapons program. And then, okay, so we send them back. Maybe we send them back 2 years, but we also kind of ushered in a much more dangerous era where they might be motivated to attack our forces with conventional forces or terrorism. They might be motivated to develop cyber attacks against the American homeland. They might be motivated to attack our allies and partners with ballistic missiles. They might be motivated to build that ICBM that can reach the United States. They might be motivated to disperse a nuclear weapons program. And could we stop them? Maybe if we found out about it. I mean, then you're really relying on the thin reed of intelligence. Back to that photograph that the Israeli government passed to the Obama administration in 2008. If the US hadn't had a partner who produced intelligence that showed us Fordo, we might never have known about it. And then, by the way, we might have woken up in 2010, 2011, just as we were leaving Iraq and kind of leaving the region. and said, wait a minute, Iran has a nuclear weapon. What the hell just happened? 3 years later, after we got that information about Fordo. So we might not find out if they disperse and reconstitute their program.
And so in effect, it's possible this action could cause them to race for a bomb.
It could cause
Possible.
them to race for a bomb. Now, there are other negative consequences of military action that some have pointed out in the commentary at the last couple of moments here. One is it could cause Iran to engage in terrorism and attack our forces. I think that's kind of baked into the force posture paradigm that U.S. Central Command and our military leaders have. But it is a real threat. And as I referenced earlier, Iran has attacked our forces. Houthi elements have fired at U.S. naval ships operating in the Red Sea. And by the way, they've come really close to hitting those U.S. naval ships. And I would suggest that if one of those drones or missiles kind of got lucky and got through and actually hit a U.S. naval ship, and we had sailors who were killed, it would be game on. We would be at an all-out war with Iran, and then any notion that the Trump administration has about a limited war, one and done, would be out the window. I mean that's a very real consequence. Um, but I think the main negative reason is it could cause them to change their calculus, reconstitute a weapons program, and we might not never know about it until it's too late.
Let me ask you a much narrower question just to address this.
Yeah.
The IAEA
Yeah.
said right before Israel launched on Iran, they said that Iran was sort of hiding some of its material and slapped Iran on the wrist, saying we
Yeah.
don't really know what's going on with some of your nuclear material. On the other hand, the US intelligence community said that there was no evidence that Iran was racing for a bomb or had a bomb right now. Are those two things necessarily at odds? And would you
No.
just drill down again? What was the actual status of their ability to get a bomb?
Sure. So those two things are not at odds. So again, there are three pillars to a weapons program. There's the bomb fuel, enriched uranium in this case. There is the weaponization part, like the implosion device that actually causes the nuclear reaction. That is like the nuclear warhead. And then there's the delivery device, the ballistic missile. On the first pillar, we know that Iran has been spinning centrifuges and enriching uranium. And we know that they've been doing it to a level of purity that is mostly for civilian purposes, though at times the IAEA have caught them enriching further. So like 90% is bomb grade and 60% is very close to bomb grade. It's not linear. It actually kind of 60 is closer to 90 than one is to 60, if you can believe it.
Oh,
So the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the international, UN-backed watchdog of the nuclear proliferation regime, they saw that Iran had enriched uranium to 60%. And also that all of the uranium wasn't accounted for. Usually they have a checklist of, oh, you enriched this amount, where's the stockpile? They'd moved stockpiles around, they'd buried some of the stockpiles deep in tunnels, and they had some that was kind of on this cusp of getting to bomb grade fuel, which led Israel, the United States, the IAEA, and by the way, Western Europe as well, to say, yeah, if Iran wanted to have weapons grade material, they only needed like a few centrifuges working for like about 2 weeks. I mean, I'm not sort of exaggerating. If you look at some of the timelines that have been put out there, some people have said like a few days, a week, 2 weeks. And by the way, this is one of the reasons why any centrifuge in the hands of Iran is so dangerous because they wouldn't need a lot, many centrifuges. I don't know, some small number, and they would need to have them work for like some period of time, and then they would have enough fuel for a nuclear weapon. And I think the estimate that I heard from IAEA sources was that if Iran worked for a short period of time with the centrifuges they had, they could create about nine nuclear weapons worth.
wow.
Okay. So that's nine nuclear weapons worth of enriched uranium. So it's not that they had decided to do that or they had done that. It's that it'll be a very short time to get there. On the weaponization part of the analysis, the U.S. intelligence community did not change its assessment. When Tulsi Gabbard last testified at the open hearing, the worldwide threats hearing before the Senate and House Intelligence Committee this past year, she read the standard analytic line that's been in every national intelligence estimate since 2007, which is that we assess that the supreme leader hasn't made the decision to restart the weaponization research that it had suspended in 2003. Now, Israel has kind of put out there um, slightly different information, which we're going to have to vet and validate. I don't want to necessarily credit it. I don't want to discredit it. Israel has been a very reliable source of information about Iran's nuclear program. I mentioned how they had brought the Fordo intelligence to the U.S. before. They've been an absolutely trustworthy partner on at the professional intelligence level about what the intelligence shows. And there's been some press reporting that Israel has developed information that Iran had restarted its research on nuclear weapons activity. Again, I'm not read into it. I don't have access to it. I don't want to credit it. I don't want to discredit it. I want to make sure your viewers know that just because it came from Israel doesn't mean it's cooked. I mean,
Mhm.
actually, it's the opposite. Israel has been as reliable on nuclear weapons intelligence as Great Britain, as Australia, as Western European powers.
Can
Um,
I just say this? And it's
yeah.
possible that what the intelligence community shares with the US intelligence community is different from what politicians say in public and how Netanyahu might hold a press conference with
Oh,
binders and exaggerate things or make whatever.
well, exactly. I mean, just and this is sort of the trick with intelligence, which is intelligence professionals call it like they see it. They're kind of truth to power people. They say, "Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know." And oh, by the way, we're not a policymaker, so we're not actually advocating for a strike, not a strike, a sanction, not a sanction. It's by the way, and by the way, the U.S. intelligence community does get things wrong. I mean, it is by the way why the U.S. intelligence community got the Iraq weapons of mass destruction case wrong in the that famous 2002 NIE, and that caused all kinds of reforms and blue ribbon commissions and changes to analytic tradecraft about how you analyze this stuff. And so it's not that these intelligence professionals are infallible. On the contrary, they're actually working. It's a very inexact science, but I'm just kind of saying that Israel has put out there that there might be some information about increased weaponization. But what I would argue is we should analyze this through the lens of let's just discount that. Like let's just say there is no more information. Let's just say it's only what we know, which is that they have suspended work, but they could restart it at any moment. Okay. So that's the weaponization piece. And then as I mentioned, on their ballistic missile program, they have really advanced the range, payload, targeting capabilities of their advanced ballistic missiles. So to answer your question, it's a long answer, but to answer your question, when the IAEA says that they have enriched uranium to concerning levels, maybe even hidden some uranium, and we say they haven't restarted their weapons program, those are completely consistent. All that it tells me as a policymaker is that this is all a gamble. Am I willing to bet that Iran stays in this mode of not having a weapon, kind of like on the 2 yard line? Have they gone to the 1 yard line? Have they gone to the half-yard line? Like, where are they? But they haven't crossed the line. And how much risk do I want to take? Can I trust them? And again, this is sort of like the post October 7th mindset. You just okay, well, Hamas, yeah, they're deterred. They're not interested in attacking Israel. They're sort of like they want to govern themselves. They've got bigger fish to fry. They've abandoned their ambitions to destroy Israel. Really? I mean, again, don't we can't as like professional analysts, we can't like mirror our own perspective on the adversary or on the enemy or on the counterparty. They don't think just the way we think, and we don't think just the way they think. That's kind of one of the really things that makes international relations, international politics interesting, because you have to put yourself in their shoes. And so, we're sitting there thinking, yeah, Iran, they're deterred. They don't really want to have a nuclear weapon. They want to kind of stay short of it. Really? I mean, maybe, but what if you gamble on that and you're wrong? Then you're the one who allowed them to get a nuclear weapon. And so, as the world's gotten more dangerous, as Iran joined the war, as Iran's flying ballistic missiles with their air defenses out, all the things we talked about, the risk reward calculus just changes.
So let's fast forward to where we are now.
Yeah.
How do we assess success and how do we know whether their weapons program has been destroyed or to what degree it's been degraded? I've even heard reports that it's possible they could have taken some enriched uranium to another location, which they could still spin up into some sort of
Yep.
dirty bomb if they want.
Exactly. So the answer is sitting here on a Sunday night, we don't know. We don't know. Let me tell you how we're going to try to find out. We're going to try to find out how effective Operation Midnight Hammer was. Okay. Um, and wait, so let me kind of take a step back. I think there are three important questions that everybody needs to be asking. One is, did the operation do what it said it was going to do? Like, did the B-2s fly where they were supposed to fly, hit the aim points they were supposed to hit? Did the MOPS work? Did they actually hit the targets? Was there good operational security? Did we suppress enemy air defenses? Was the decoy and secrecy work? Was there operational secrecy? And I think, again, sitting here 24 hours later, just, people will listen to this when they listen to this. It sounds like the operation was successful from that perspective. That's the tactical perspective. I give credit to that to the armed services of the United States, the uniformed military. And I just want to say, Jessica, for the record, and I'm not going to tell you whether I agree with the operation or I don't agree, but I can tell you once our pilots were airborne, I was rooting for them to hit their targets and get home safely. That's number one. Second question is, did it actually set back Iran's nuclear program? To what extent? That's kind of the heart of the inquiry, which you're asking. We don't know yet. So I would say on number one, check. Number two is a question mark. We don't know yet. What do we have to understand in order to assess it? First, we'd like to be able to see with our own eyes, or at least our own satellite imagery, electro-optical or radar imagery, what is going on in these facilities. We can't. They're underground for the most part. We cannot have a camera in space on a satellite look down through a mountain. We don't have that. We haven't figured that one out yet. We have a tough enough time with clouds, cloud cover. So we have some ability to detect certain things, but it's very imperfect. And I don't think we're going to learn the answer from space. I think instead we're going to learn the answer from signals intelligence interception, communications intercepts of Iranian officials talking to each other, saying, we got a report about the situation at Isfahan. We got a report about the situation at Natanz. Here, Mr. Supreme Leader, or here, Mr. Head of the IRGC, or here, Mr. Head of the Armed Forces. Here's what we know and here's what we don't know. And it's going to be a very, I don't think it's going to be black and white. I don't think it's going to be the place is completely destroyed or it's not. I think it's going to be like Cascades 1 through 75 have suffered 25% damage, and Cascades 76 through 123 has suffered 83% damage. I mean, there's going to be some pretty checkerboard information, and we're going to have to reconcile it because we're not just going to intercept one conversation. We're going to intercept a lot of documents, interceptions, emails, phone calls, texts. We're going to have to put a lot of information together and then figure out, okay, what do we believe? Who's lying to who? Who has a motivation to tell the truth? Who doesn't have a motivation to tell the truth? Who thinks we're listening? Who thinks they're talking in secret without us listening? So that's a lot of analytic work. There's a ton of analytic work there. We're going to do it. The Israelis are definitely going to do it, but also other countries are going to do it as well. That's going to take time. I mean, that's going to take, I think, days, weeks, years. Now, if on Friday we get some really amazing information that, the Supreme Leader was briefed on the impacts and the briefing said this, and it shows that, we were really effective, I think the Trump administration is going to be pretty eager to put that out.
Right.
What happens, Jessica, if actually the Supreme Leader gets briefed? Now, the operation wasn't that effective. Fordo is pretty much intact. We got the Cascades out. You think the Trump administration is going to put that out?
No.
Sources and methods, sorry, can't comment on that.
Right.
I mean, I don't think so. So it's going to be very hard for the person on the outside to really evaluate what the heck is going on. I just would mention that the other way we might learn about what's going on is human sources. So remember I said that somebody had taken a picture inside Fordo in 2008 and passed it ultimately to the US intelligence community. Maybe there are sources who are willing to go in and observe, and that's obviously the heart of espionage. You get people on the ground to do things that you can't do yourselves. And by the way, we're not the only ones trying to do that either. Other countries are as well. So you got human intelligence, signals intelligence, overhead imagery. You got multiple ints. There might be some open source information. This might be crowdsourced a little bit on the internet. And you're going to have all kinds of views and perspectives. The U.S. intelligence community is going to have to put it all together. And I think one of the most important questions that the House Intelligence Committee, ranking Democrat Jim Himes, the Senate Intelligence Committee, ranking Democrat Vice Chairman Mark Warner, are going to have to ask is show us the collection, show us the analysis. We want to know what was successful, not because we want to grade Trump's homework. We want to know, is Iran really, prevented from getting a nuclear weapon? If the answer is that we set them back 3 months, a lot of people are going to say this operation, wasn't as amazing as we thought it was. if it set them back 4 years, maybe that's worth it. It's hard to know. The third question, we talked about three questions. Did the military do its tactical thing right? Check. Second one is how much did it disable, dismantle, obliterate the Iranian nuclear program? Obliterate is Trump's word.
Yeah.
Question mark. The third question is what's Iran's reaction? We talked a little bit about could they disperse? Could they reconstitute? Could they attack us? Question mark. We just don't know that yet. We're only 24 hours into this.
Would you lay out that last part for us a little bit, not specific to just their nuclear material, but what happens next largely depends on Iran. They get the next move. And I would love for you to just somewhat briefly lay out the different scenarios of what they could do, and acknowledging that at this point, I understand Iran's parliament voted in favor of closing the Strait of Hormuz, this massive waterway that we rely on to move oil out of the Persian Gulf, which could cripple the world economy by shooting oil prices through the roof.
Yeah.
But we don't know if that's actually going to happen. So that's one of the economic impacts that's possible. What's the array of options?
Well, again, they could unleash their terrorist proxies like the Houthis to fire weapons at U.S. military forces. We've talked about naval ships. We've talked about our military forces in the region. They could send rocket, artillery, and mortars, short-range missiles into our military bases. By the way, they did that before. After we killed Qasem Soleimani, the IRGC commander in 2019, Iran retaliated with a series of strikes against our forces. Trump derided them as having headaches, even though they had traumatic brain injury. And so there is actually precedent for our forces getting injured severely from Iranian missile attacks. And look, they could buy their time and they could not respond right away, and they could try to rebuild Hezbollah. They could try to destabilize Syria. They could do a number of things. And yes, you referenced the economic powers that they have, somewhat limited because they're heavily under sanction, but they do control the Straits of Hormuz. And one concerning thing they could do is they could lay mines in the Straits of Hormuz. Now, laying mines in the Straits of Hormuz basically means, undersea mines so that any ship passing through there could blow. And some people have said, well, Iran is not going to do that because its own ships have to transit the Straits of Hormuz. And that's true. It is kind of the, bad pun, it is the nuclear option, but they could do that. They have mine-laying ships. I would just say that if we got intelligence that Iran was about to mine the Straits of Hormuz, we could not wait for those ships to be underway because you don't know when that thing is going to drop in the water. Once you do that, it's too late. You can't find it. I mean, we have minesweepers, but then it's very dangerous. So we'd have to take preemptive military action to actually destroy and sink all of their mine-laying ships. So that would be another attack by U.S. Air Force or U.S. naval assets against Iranian military capabilities.
Okay, so then let's switch it and talk about what the US faces next, because I'm hearing from especially young people that there's this sudden panic that there's going to be a draft and that there's going to be boots on the ground in Iran. And, we're entering World War III. I mean, this could be a larger
No,
conversation, but first of all, is World War III even a useful notion
no.
in an era of proxy wars and drones? And what are the chances there's boots on the ground or a draft?
No, a multi-nation war against the U.S. and our allies, I don't foresee spinning out of this because I don't think China and Russia have any interest in getting in an all-out frontal confrontation with the United States. It serves neither of their purposes. They both are actually focused on something completely different. It has nothing to do with Iran. Russia's focused on Ukraine and their near abroad, including the Baltics and including Eastern Europe. And China is, of course, focused on the South China Sea and on Taiwan. So, the idea that they would like go to World War III to support Iran, I don't think so. Um, and as far as the draft, um, again, we fought significant military battles since 9/11 in Iraq, in Afghanistan, as part of a NATO coalition in Libya. We've had an extensive military presence in the Indo-Pacific, uh, obviously in the Central Command AOR. There's been no talk by any political leader that I've encountered about having a draft. There's been talk about having national service. You graduate high school and you go do community service or serve your country for 1 or 2 years and you get some benefits like college tuition paid, like a kind of expansion of a super ROTC program. But I've never heard any talk about a draft. We don't need that. We don't want actually a mandatory conscription. We believe in the US that our doctrine and our training doctrine is that an all volunteer force is the most highly capable, highly motivated force. We want people to sign up and say, I want in, I want to serve my country, I want to go in harm's way to defend, what the United States military defends.
And what do you
So
think are the
draft, no,
chances
I
of
don't see
boots on
that.
the ground,
I
US
don't see
sending troops
boots.
to Iran?
So again, I don't see that. And people are saying, well, did Trump do a 180 here? He was so anti-war. I mean, I'm not sure it's a 180. It's more like a 45 because again, because Trump and Biden and others have used standoff weapons, meaning, weapons on an air platform or a naval platform that is not over an air defense system, like far away, um, to strike targets. We've struck targets. We've struck, Iranian surrogates and proxies. We've struck Houthi targets. We've struck terrorist targets. Um, we have no problem hitting targets when our troops aren't in harm's way. When you put boots on the ground, you're in harm's way by definition. So I think that's why President Trump and President Biden wanted to get out of Afghanistan. I think it's why President Obama wanted to get out of Iraq. When you've got boots on the ground, you're responsible for nation building, you're responsible for institution building, you're there to guard NGOs and State Department personnel and civilians and contractors, and it becomes like a whole American footprint there. And I don't think any American president in the post-Iraq era supports a massive ground presence of U.S. forces, diplomats, intelligence personnel, in a post-war situation. I can't see boots on the ground. I'm not sure what purpose it would achieve. So I actually believe the Trump administration when they say they don't want boots on the ground. I believe they don't. I believe they truly don't.
Uh,
I believe they truly were conflicted about airstrikes on Iran, and you saw some of the MAGA fissures coming out. Believe they truly were divided because there are arguments for and against, which we've laid out here. But I believe, it was a close call, but they decided to go for it.
One thing a lot of people are worried about, I just want to acknowledge it, is that there could be terror attacks here in the US.
Yeah.
That's always been a possibility. It remains a possibility. It's not something we can live our lives anticipating. It's just,
We've seen an uptick of attacks, particularly against Jewish institutions. You've got that cop car outside of every synagogue and Jewish community center, and even my own kids' summer camp. So you've got a threat posture that's pretty severe, and the threat of terrorism is real. We had two Israeli embassy employees gunned down on the streets of Washington, D.C., near where I live, outside of a Jewish museum. You've had, Jewish activists firebombed in Boulder, Colorado. You've had, attacks on institutions and synagogues. You've had Josh Shapiro's home, arsoned on Passover. So, terrorist extremists who claim to be motivated by Gaza or Iran or whatever U.S. policy in the Middle East, I think it's a big reason for the a terrorist. There are plenty of reasons for terrorists to attack us, but it's not. I don't think it's the thing that should govern how we conduct our foreign policy.
I don't want to take your whole day, but I have a few more questions. Are
Yeah,
we okay
sure.
to? Okay. Uh, Trump, after saying that the administration's not interested in regime change, and Hegseth sent that just earlier
Yeah.
today on Sunday, Trump subsequently posted on Truth Social that if Iran is not doing a good job for its people, why not regime change? Make Iran a great again, he posted. So, what would regime change look like or entail?
So, okay. Well, Jessica, this is a great question, and we have to be a little epistemological here, and because you're a lover of language, what do you mean by regime change?
Right.
Well, so let me kind of posit why I asked the question. A change of the regime might be fine. Regime change, that phrase now implies that we're going to impose it using military force. So I think regime change, as defined as imposing a change of the regime by military force, is a terrible idea. I'll, show my cards. I think it's a terrible idea, and I think most people agree with that. I think the idea of trying to get regime change at the end of an F-35 extended range weapon is probably not going to work. Um, Not to mention the fact that in order, if you break it, you buy it, the Colin Powell Pottery Barn rule. And the reason why our projects in Iraq and Afghanistan proved so challenging was because we did have to put boots on the ground, not because we were engaged in, ground combat at every moment, although we were against terrorists and insurgents, but because we had to protect institutions. The institutions were going to run themselves. The health ministry was going to run itself. The security apparatus, the military was going to run itself. So I think regime changes imposed by an outside force is a loser. There have been examples of regime change in the Middle East that have actually gone well, or I would say gone better than the alternative. Syria, I am glad that Bashar Assad is out of there. So far, so good. I mean, again, we don't exactly know what this new, you know, team in Syria is going to do. They've actually had ties to Al Qaeda before, but again, so far, so good. I'd rather have them than Bashar Assad. Egypt, 2011, maybe that turned out well. The Arab Spring for Egypt. Again, I could argue it round or flat. They had a Muslim Brotherhood government for a little while. Then they kind of went back. Tunisia, I could argue it either way.
No, can I ask you
Libya,
a question
yeah,
about the people of Iran? Because what you're proposing is an internal change
right.
that's
So
from,
that's my point is when governments change organically, that could work. It's not going to work inorganically. But again, in dictatorships, in autocracies, organic change is really hard because the whole purpose of the regime is to suppress that. So it works. I mean, it's going to work in the rarest of circumstances. Now, Libya is an interesting case, Jessica. Gaddafi was in charge of Libya. There were a set of rebels in Libya that weren't exactly good guys, but they were kind of our guys, and they were marching on Gaddafi. The US used military force in conjunction with NATO to support them because Gaddafi's forces were going to obliterate them on the battlefield. We went in and we hit Gaddafi's forces. Gaddafi ultimately was run out of power and he was killed. And a new government arose in Libya and it was kind of a shit show for a while. We had the Benghazi attacks, we had all kinds of chaos. Sitting here in 2025, is Libya better off with the government it has now or with Gaddafi? It's hard to argue the counterfactual. I'm not saying it was the right call. I'm just saying Libya is a little bit of a closer situation. I think Syria is probably an example of a regime change we could all support. Um, Egypt, probably. I think the Obama administration basically did support the regime change in Egypt and in Tunisia, and Iraq held to the no.
right. So I think about the Iranian people. It's one of the oldest civilizations on earth. It's such a rich culture. And this is a educated, informed populace that's really suffered for a long time. So many of them don't want this regime to be in power. Do they have the internal capacity to replace this regime? Is there an organized opposition? If the Ayatollah were for some reason to flee or fall, do they have the ability to replace this government?
So, um, I'll give you my answer and then I'll tell you why I might be wrong. My answer is not that I've seen. I haven't seen it that they have this capability. And we've seen, green shoots, and green is the actual color, green shoots of revolutionary forces and women's activists and, outside expatriate communities, diaspora communities supporting, the Iranian people. And I agree with you with your premise is that sort of the culture and history of Persia, its enlightened role in the world. In fact, Iran used to have a great relationship with the United States and with Israel, actually. And there were, before 1979, there were direct flights between Tel Aviv and Tehran. And so these countries are not preordained to be at war with one another. There's nothing inherently in the culture of Iranians that make them, adverse to the United States or to even principles that are adjacent to democracy or freedom. But they are under the rule of an authoritarian dictatorial regime that has worked very hard to suppress any shoots of democracy. But I haven't seen the organic strength that I think would be required to topple the regime from within. But I want to hasten to add, I might be wrong because I don't think I saw what happened in Syria. And I also remember in Egypt in 2011 being at the CIA It was a very consequential year in 2011 when the Arab Spring began. Um, and I remember that time because we were also working on the operation against Osama bin Laden, which happened in May 2011. And there were all kinds of things happening. And there was a tsunami in Japan that affected their nuclear reactor. And there were a number of national security crises that the Obama administration was grappling with in the first part of 2011, not even to mention what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan. I didn't see Egypt coming and I didn't see Syria coming. And so, and by the way, I just want to say, I also didn't see Israel attacking Iran on the Thursday before the Sunday of the talks between Trump and the Iranians in Oman. And I didn't see Trump attacking Iran when he said we have 2 weeks. So I've been faked out. You've been faked out. I'm not sure it's smart to predict anything. So before I proclaim that there's no way that the Iranian people could rise up and topple their government, I better eat some humble pie.
I love it. Okay, so let's bring this to a close. What I want to ask is the president has continually urged Iran to reach a diplomatic solution. After he's dropped these bombs, he's saying, let's make peace. Is that even in the cards? And what would that entail? What would a diplomatic solution look like?
So the deal that was on the table that Steve Witkoff was negotiating with Iran was essentially to wind down Iran's domestic enrichment program. And in exchange, we'd put inspectors, aggressively back in. We would maybe lift some sanctions. It'd be a transition. But the idea would be to phase out Iran's ability, its right to enrich domestically. The problem with the deal, and this is why I think the Israelis got really nervous with it, was that in some ways it had like less bells and whistles and protections than even the Obama deal. It was kind of like JCPOA minus. And in particular, one very MAGA Trumpy person said to me recently, I don't like what Witkoff is negotiating because actually it would allow Iran to only reach that sort of fully phased out status after Trump leaves office, meaning after 3.5 years from now. So the timelines were kind of elongated. And you never know who could be president. It could be a Democrat. I mean, that's sort of what this person was saying to me. So okay, that's the deal on the table. Now, I think Trump thinks that he's gotten more leverage in the deal, and so maybe the deal is within a year, you agree to get rid of all of your domestic enrichment. You agree to close Fordo, close Esfahan, close Natanz. You agree to disable, dismantle, let us take out, not by military force, but like by trucks and people wearing rubber gloves, the Cascades, and unplug everything and put inspectors in there and turn it into a big museum. And literally say, Iran, we will sell you nuclear energy until you're happy as a clam and warm at night in a cold winter. You can have as much nuclear energy as you want, but no, you cannot enrich. We just don't trust you to do it. I think if Iran could somehow figure out a way to save face and accept that deal, then I think that's the deal. But I mean, you can see by my description of it, and I can tell you agree, the chances of Iran agreeing to that after they've been, slapped upside the head by, seven B-2s is pretty unlikely.
This is such a remarkable conversation. You are so generous to share all this knowledge with us. My last question is what should we be looking for in the next 72 hours, the next 2 weeks to
Well, I'm
understand which way
obviously
this is
looking for
going?
that battle damage assessment, any information either from the US, from allies and partners, or from Iran about what actually is going on at Fordo, what actually is going on at Esfahan and Natanz, these three facilities that we struck in Operation Midnight Hammer. Um, I'm obviously trying to understand the force protection posture of U.S. military forces and whether or not there are real risks, inbound missiles, inbound artillery to U.S. Personnel. I obviously want to see if Iran continues to fire ballistic missiles at Israel, whether Israel continues its operations to degrade ballistic missiles. I mean, Israel might think, let's not waste the crisis. Iran is on its back legs. Let's try to finish off all of their military capability. Certainly want to look to see whether or not any of these green shoots of revolution take hold and whether or not there's any organic efforts at regime change. I don't have any, time in my day for a lot of inorganic regime change, as I sort of already talked about. But those are the things I'm looking for. And also, I think we got to keep our eye on other balls, including what Russia's ambitions are vis-a-vis Ukraine, China's ambitions are vis-a-vis Taiwan. Again, if you ask me, even a few weeks ago, what's the top national security challenge facing the United States? I'd say we're in a pretty self-defeating trade war. We've allowed Putin to write the terms of peace with Ukraine. Um, I think we need to upgrade our deterrence against China vis-a-vis Taiwan. We have a lot of work to do. And honestly, bombing Iran's nuclear program was not on my bingo card. I actually did predict and I did say on Thursday, June 13th, in a panel discussion that I thought Iran's nuclear program would be bombed by Israel in this calendar year or this calendar month, but I did not have it in this calendar day. And so I was
Wow. Even you can be slightly off every so often.
very off.
Jeremy, I always learn when I talk to you. Thank you so, so much for sharing your knowledge and for taking time to explain all this to us on a
Thanks,
Sunday.
Jessica.
Really grateful.